Hey everyone, I'm Melissa from Knitting the Stash. This is Spencer.
Hey.
From Meta Spencer.
Company sent me here. What episode is this?
This is episode 137.
137?
Yeah.
So you're kind of on a roll now? You feel
I don't know,
sort of,
I mean...
You're getting the kinks out?
I feel like there's got to be an end point at some point. I don't know. Maybe it's just it turns back into a...
We're going to talk about that later.
Personal diary or something.
I've got something to say about that.
Really? Wow. Now
Personal
I'm kind of like curious. Yeah, it kind of started out as a personal diary, and now it's, you know,
and you're
there are
talking
people
about,
out there.
You're going to talk about your gray sweater.
It's sitting behind you. Yeah, it is like skin tight over there on the mannequin. So we'll talk about the yoke.
Number one.
No, that's going to come after you.
No, but that's like the first one or the second one?
That's the first one.
That's the first one.
Skin tight, yeah.
Skin tight sweater.
The skin's tight, yeah. I mean, I don't think that's a flattering look for a lot of me.
Negative ease?
For a lot of me's. The negative ease.
She had a little bit of a sweater debacle go down.
But you all remember those sweaters back in the 90s? They were like always ribbed, like all over ribbed sweaters. Did men have that?
In the 90s we wore those vests.
Oh, the vests.
You know, had like the plaid
we had to wear the ribbed
swetter
shirt thing under the vest with the turtlenecks. There were all these turtlenecks with the ribs. It was like skin tight everything. I mean, I love the 90s.
Sounds good.
No.
It wasn't good?
Anyway, we'll talk about the skin tight sweater and how I fixed it. But Spencer's here to talk about something else.
We're talking about long-term projects.
I was wondering if it would be long-term or like long haul. Like I feel like long haul truckers.
Long haul
kind of like...
Yeah, so the first thing to do, I think, since I run this podcast series,
is to say where you can find everything.
Oh, that's right.
I always forget.
That's right.
Okay, Knitting the Stash everywhere. Ravelry, YouTube,
Knitting the Stash,
Instagram, and the website, which is knittingthestash.com.
And why is it called Knitting the Stash?
That's a good question. Because back in the day, before I had a lot of stash, I think I had one bin of stash.
That was a big stash.
I was like, I should knit from my stash. And it was like a big challenge. This was back in like 2015
then we got
when I
the
started
moving
the
truck.
blog or something, 2013. Yeah, and then, no.
And you stashed out.
That's all it did was increase the stash, so.
So have you thought about calling it Knitting the Hoard at some point?
Knitting the Hoard?
Yeah, the Hoard.
No, it's a collection, man.
Oh.
It's a collection.
Ah, sorry.
Yeah, we're pro-stash around here.
Oh, really?
We're stash positive. That's what we like to think of it. Anyway.
Stash positive.
Knittingthestash.com is where you can find everything. Classes, yarn. I'm going to talk about the sweater I'm knitting is in Shorn, and this man knows what it's like to deal with
this sounds
yarn
like a
production.
promo.
Yarn production, man. You built the carding table, or the skirting table for the... Carding table, that would be good. Skirting table for the fleece. He's living with fleece in his basement right now.
There's so much yarn stuff around
pile
here.
Of fleece in the basement.
I was vacuuming the other day, and it was like, I couldn't tell if it was just all yarn, little things on the floor.
Oh, did you vacuum up the stitch markers, though?
No, but the little pieces of yarn are everywhere.
Every once in a while, he sucks up like a knitting needle.
There's one right
there,
the stitch marker right there I didn't vacuum. I went around it.
Okay.
But then you leave a dust circle around the stitch marker.
No. Then I go and pick, and then I wipe it.
Okay. So on the topic of long projects, what would you say defines one in the knitting world? Like, like more than a day?
That's the thing. That's different in different like circles or different hobbies and stuff, right? Like knitting, sweater can take me 2 weeks or a month.
That's a long project.
And other people, sweaters can take years.
Oh. So wait, which one's a long project?
It just depends on the person, I think.
It depends on
For
the
me,
person.
the long-term projects are like the videos, though. Like the tutorials and things like that. Because to do a tutorial, I have to like conceive of the tutorial, I have to like get all the materials, and then you have to like film the first part, do the knitting or whatever it is, and like film the next part. And it can take like... There were some tutorials. There was one on spinning. Do you remember that 2 ways to spin a 3-ply that you filmed for me?
I might have forgot it, but it should have been etched in my mind.
Yeah.
It took a while.
It took forever because I had to, you know, do all the prep work, then spin both kinds, and then come... Anyway, some of these videos could just take a long time.
Take a lot.
Yeah, the sock blank took a long time.
Yeah. I've had a few videos that took me a few months to make.
You make long videos.
Sometimes. But some projects like building a house are expected to take a year or two.
Right.
So, but it's still a long project.
Yeah.
But I guess there's also those projects that become delayed.
Yeah, those maybe are the long haul projects.
The long haul project.
The one where you're like, the whips that are just kind of sitting in the corner, like whips of all kinds.
You come to some kind of stumbling block.
Yeah.
Or some kind of issue and just can't get through it.
Like for us recently, we have heat now, by the way. Look, we're in t-shirts because we have too much heat.
In December.
Yeah, and on the last episode, I was sitting here in like 5 sweaters. I had like a down puffy on my lap. Like I was covered in yarn. I was like so cold.
Oh.
My hands were cold. There was no heat in the house, like 0. And then this
we installed this whole heat. You probably told people.
No.
Oh, you didn't? Mm-mm. Oh. Well, there's a video about this. You can see. Yeah, we installed a new heating project.
Heating system.
It was a project.
Yeah.
Installed a new heating system, and it took us a couple months, I think.
At least.
Working weekends. But I think we thought of it like a year before.
Yeah.
Like it's been in process for a long time.
Well, yeah, I mean, and in that case, it's a lot like knitting or like, you know, some of your building projects where you have to like source the materials, and in the pandemic, that can take forever.
Take a while.
Right? Sometimes you can't get the thing that you want or the yarn that you want. Remember, Icelandic yarn, Lopi yarn was like out of stock everywhere for a long time for a lot of us. That was really hard.
You mentioned these things that just don't come to mind. Like, I don't remember the Lopi yarn shortage.
The Lopi yarn shortage, you're not like,
I know toilet paper was out, like lumber prices went up. The Lopi yarn.
Totally out of stock. It was like hard to get.
I'll have to check the headlines for that.
Yeah,
look back.
You will. Try it on Google News. Yeah. You'll find it. So like sourcing the materials can be really difficult, and then once you get them, then you need other material like the supplementary. You know, if you need buttons or other stuff. So for us, we had to get like all the pipe and some of the fittings were.
We even
pumps and stuff.
Didn't know exactly what we didn't know. Like we didn't.
That might be.
We didn't have the whole thing charted out. Like I would say in a long project, it's ideal if you can see the end.
Okay, this reminds me of all the lawyers, like the lawyer TV shows where they're like, you never ask a question that you don't know the answer to. So like, you know. You
never start a project that you don't know how to finish?
You don't know how to finish, or you don't even know the steps along the way?
I've never started a project that I knew how to finish. Just
this guy.
It's just, you know, and then what's the fun in that?
Then you'll rope me in, you're like, oh, we totally got this. It's a heating system.
Yeah.
New heating system. We're going to get it installed. So in my mind, we get the heating system, and like after a week or 2, we have heat. But it was
after a week or 2, you're still digging trenches, learning how to use an excavator. To
as it got colder and colder and colder. See, this is like it's also the ant and the grasshopper story, right? That we always joke about, because like you're the grasshopper and I'm the ant.
Oh, and then
you're like out partying, like playing your little violin with your wings or whatever, and I'm over there just like socking stuff away, like prepping, getting my little charts and everything, and then winter comes, and I'm like
the cold. The fact that it was 40 degrees in the house did inspire me to spend a little more time on the heating system.
But I'm also pretty proud of us because we got down to like I think it was 42 in the kitchen.
40.
We made it down to 42, and we were okay.
We were
sympathetic. Like we still have a lot of sympathy for all the people around the world right now who don't have heat because of all the crises going on with the invasion in Ukraine and the UK and heating prices and everything. So like
just other reasons.
This is it's like a crazy time. So we're pretty fortunate to have heat.
And actually, our system's not totally done. No. Like it's gonna need a few little.
And the fact that we're sitting here in t-shirts tells you something about that.
We could probably figure out a way to regulate the heat a little better.
It's a little bit hot, unfortunately. And we're like, it's funny because that's the other thing about this that makes me think about projects is like I think about projects, you know, with efficiency and like you have a certain kind of principle in mind with a lot of the projects that I do at least.
Yeah.
Long-term projects.
Yeah.
And like with this one. With heating, my principle has always been turn it down, put more sweaters on, like just, you know. But with this heating system, we have not, we can't conserve yet. So we're both
figure it out.
Philosophically struggling with that a little bit.
Needs a little regulation.
Yeah.
But with long-term projects, I would have to say I sort of prefer the short-term ones.
Really? Like the instant gratification?
I want a regular diet of the short-term projects because if you're just doing long-term stuff, you never have the completion.
You never get the satisfaction. No, it's true.
And you can't like cross stuff off your list and, you know.
I often talk about those as like palette cleansers. Like, so like I'll knit a bunch of sweaters and then I'm like, oh, I just want something that can be done in, you know, a day or 2 days or you know, whatever. And it's like I'll knit a hat and some gloves and whatever. And it's like, oh, they're done. It's really nice.
Yeah.
So.
Palette cleanser.
Yeah. What are your favorite palette cleanser projects? When you've done some long-term stuff. Like you're in the middle of building a barn right now, like
a heating system. The heating system was short-term in comparison to the barn.
Help me.
Barn has taken over a year. Heating system, a couple months.
So for you, the palette cleanser can be a couple months long.
Yeah.
Do you have any short projects ever?
I can't. When you mentioned that, I couldn't really think of anything. Occasionally just repairing something, but that usually blows up.
Yeah.
You know?
There was a door there was a door, remember, that came and it didn't have all the parts and it was messed up, and you took it in the basement and just like hot glued it and did stuff to it, and you brought it back up, and it was like a couple days. Stuff.
You know, like I had to replace the front brakes on the truck.
Yeah, that was
No, you just like get that done in an afternoon.
Yeah.
After procrastinating on it for 6 months until the brakes freeze up and catch fire, and then you know you have to do it.
Now you all know what I'm actually doing with. Yeah.
Only one actually melted down, caught fire. The other one's doing just fine.
So, what I was going to say is, those kinds of projects, there's also like the long-term procrastination, and I've heard a lot about this like lately on social media from people. Like, there's all those projects that you're like, you spend your whole like summer or like winter avoiding, and then you sit down to do it because you're like, oh, I just have to do this, and it takes like 10 minutes or an afternoon or something.
Yeah, you think.
But in your mind, it's a long haul project. It's like a big deal. Like, I think to myself right now, I need to organize a lot of stuff in this house. Like, the books need to be organized, the bookshelves.
When you're ready for it, you'll just knock it out.
You just kind of sit there and do it.
And then you can organize like the shop too,
right,
all at the same time.
Right.
Is that on your to-do list?
No. Okay, so advice for anyone who's thinking about, for those of you who have never done a long haul project, like a project that actually, has anyone never, like, I'm curious, are there those of you who have never done a long haul project? I bet.
Those huge blanket projects.
Yeah. Or some
kind of like really complicated
epic
sweater thing that you know it's like got cables and all kinds of stuff.
What's advice for like is that, should you do it? Like, why do it?
I think one of the biggest things we've learned is what we did when we built this house, which is to do a lot of advanced planning till you have like a step-by-step.
This is you.
We got the house built in the summer because this one got compulsive.
I had a pegboard with like
step-by-step, so you know, when I get to the yoke, I'll do this. When I get to the armpits, I'll do this. As opposed to like I get to the armpits and like, oh, I got to figure out how to do that.
And I think you get to the point where you can see the end, like or you start at the end. That's one of the things we always do with our students is like you work backwards. So like you say to them, like, you want to have a completed dissertation, write that down, and then try to figure out how you like work backwards to get to that point. So
that would be on the side of like how to get it done. But the other side is that you've got to also accept that maybe it's just going to remain kind of open for a while. Yeah,
and that can be really like psychologically
You're going to hit some hiccups and you're going to leave it on the mannequin. And
see, I could have left that one on the mannequin. I could just have dropped it. But sometimes they matter more.
You got to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Like you can't, if you're too compulsive and you need to get everything done.
Why are you looking at me
so quickly?
Why are you looking at me?
You got to chill out a little bit and just let it flow. Let the cold weather infiltrate the house.
Let your partner freeze to death and then be like, we should get heat.
Any other tips for the long haulers?
I was thinking if you have some other motivation other than the actual, like, the process, like if you're, for like this sweater, I'm thinking to myself, I really want the sweater in the end. So like, sure, I had to reknit the yoke and it's had some, hiccups along the way, but like if you really want the thing at the end, or if you can find some other reason to do it, like a tutorial or something where you're like, it's going to help people knit better or make things better. So you have this other goal in mind.
Kind of goal in mind.
Then you're kind of like just moving through the stages to get to that other goal, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with the like minutia of the day-to-day that you're dealing with. We've
got this guy down the road who has this huge barn. And for the last couple of years, he was fixing it up. I mean, it's a massive barn.
He actually moved some art. It's this beautiful art installation that he had on the side of the barn, and I think his son was the artist, and it was full length, like from the foundation all the way up to the roof of the barn. And he took it down tile by tile, like whatever was like
on the siding or whatever.
On the siding, and like moved it around the barn. It was like
put a new roof on it, put in skylights and stuff. And then he didn't work on it for a year.
He just disappeared.
And it's just clearly one of those long. I mean, that would be a project that would take years. And they took a year off. We don't know what's going on. We haven't talked to him.
He at least got to a kind of stopping point. That might be the other piece of advice: is like try to work toward stopping points, like places where you can pause and give yourself a break, and then you can go back to it, and nothing happens bad in the meantime.
With the barn, I've got the Tyvek on there.
You mean the siding?
Yeah, which is long-term siding. It flaps around a little bit in the wind, but it feels like at least it keeps the wind out. And I'm trying to figure out this trim detail I cannot figure out right now, so it's like a stopping point. It's a stopping point. It looks a little bit...
It's keeping the weather out for the most part.
Yeah, it's okay.
It's like...
The water blows in through the windows, but that's kind of contained, it just kind of sprays right there.
I remember with this house, we got to a point where we had the sheathing on the roof, and we couldn't put the roof on because we didn't have enough roof material. And that was when we bought the tarp that was like a tarp big enough for this part of the house. And we actually put a tarp on the entire house and then worked on the inside for a long time until we had the rest of the roofing stuff.
We got it done.
We got it done. But those stopping points
those are good. Those are
pretty good.
Don't panic.
Yeah. How about why bother with these long-term projects?
Oh.
Like, what's the satisfaction for you?
Oh, it's just, for me, it's just cool to have something like that. Like, you can always, even though you have other things to do, you've always got the big long-termer.
Oh, so it's like a background thing. Like, you're like...
Yeah, you just, like, always have something to work on, and, like, a big thing that you're working on.
What happens if you don't have something to work on?
You find something real dang quick.
He's Mr. Spooky.
You find something.
So many Spookies.
Yeah, if you don't have it...
I will find him, like, in the house, just kind of, like...
Yeah, you gotta have it.
Like, squirreling.
But that's what I like about it. Like with you... You were doing this before. You're not doing it right now, but you would have like a blanket in the background. Then you would be knitting like your sweaters and your cowls and stuff.
But I don't have that right now.
Yeah.
I just do the sweaters.
You're just good with that.
But I have other the thing is I have long-term
sweaters.
I have long-term projects at work. Like so many long-term projects at work that like I don't...
at work.
Yeah, like work,
where you make your money.
I don't want more of those. Like though, to me that kind of is a little bit stressful. I'd rather have something like my sweaters, even though they take a couple weeks, they're like completable, they're practical. It's like every day I can work on it and I can see the progress. Whereas at work, those are those long-term projects where you're like, oh,
yeah, there you go.
It takes a long time.
So,
but I like having done them, but I also like that kind of arc that you see where you're like, where you can actually like take an idea and then it's, for me, a lot of them are testing. Like a lot of the videos, the tutorials and stuff, I don't necessarily know how they're going to end. We're back to that question. And like, sometimes I just make one because I think, well, this will push me to try it and see if it works.
And you learn from it.
And you learn from it. And then you get this arc of a narrative, which is really cool to see. So for me, it's a little bit more, a lot of times it's experimental. That's where I experiment, I guess.
That's good.
More so than in work.
The longer stuff.
Yeah, like, will this work out with the sock blank, or will this... I have no idea. If I spin these things, will it work out? You just...
Will the house have heat? It does.
Thank goodness.
Didn't think it would.
Yeah. So, any other thoughts?
That's it.
We're done. We're out of thoughts. They're gone.
Long term, I think it's good stuff.
Yeah. It was fun to talk to you about it. There's always something. The communal, like, creativity.
So you're going to talk about your sweater next?
Yeah, I got it.
Right, I'm going to leave you to it.
I'm going to do it.
Thanks for having me on the cast.
See you later.
Matt and Spencer on YouTube.
Bye. So I hope you all enjoyed having Spencer come on the cast. I always enjoy having him come up to the yarn room. And those topics are always pretty interesting because he's coming at them from a slightly different perspective. And we often talk about these kinds of things, but not in detail until we sit down here. So I never quite know what's going to come up. It's kind of like the fun of the surprise, I suppose. So as he mentioned, this is the yoke that was reknit. And this is the sweater that I talked about last week, and I'm going to grab the magazine actually. So this is the Cuenca pullover. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Cuenca? C-U-E-N-C-A. I don't know. By Paula Periera. And it is one of the sweaters that appears in the latest issue of AmiriSue magazine. And I talked about it last week, or the last episode, when I just had barely started the ribbing and the cables had just started. And I think I held it up for you all and I said, I think it looks a little small. And that wasn't just because of the cables, it was also because I was worried about the cast-on stitches and things like that. I'm working out of the gauge of the pattern and with different yarn. So that's always a little bit of a tricky thing to do. But what I usually do in that case is I'll take my gauge and I will do the math for myself about what size I'm looking for, and I'll do the math in the pattern to figure out what, if there's not a schematic that gives you, the basic measurements that are expected by the designer. And so I'll do my own math, match it up with whatever schematic measurements work out. So if I'm going for a size 37, I will do that math and then see what the stitch count looks like for my, what would be my size, and then I'll look for that stitch count in the pattern, and often it's a size or two up or down depending on which way your gauge is off. So in this case I went for 2 sizes up in the pattern, which tends to work done this many times before, where you do that math and you find your stitch count and you go into the pattern, you're like, okay, well this looks pretty good, a couple sizes up or a couple sizes down, you know, depending on the sizing. And, you know, so I cast on for that particular size. And the issue is not with the size itself, because this neck, the actual upper portion of the yoke up here and the ribbing, that's all fine. What happens with this sweater though, and this, maybe it's just my experience, though I have seen the two other patterns that are up on Ravelry right now, they both have, you know, one says note to self, try it on as she's finishing the yoke, and the other one said, the yoke and the sleeves are a little bit snug. So I don't think I'm the only one who's having this issue with this pattern, because once I got down to the cables, granted, I'm a tight knitter, I know that, but I was working engaged 2 sizes up in the pattern and it should have been okay. But because of this particular cable pattern and the way it's constructed, it really does, it's almost like a corset for your shoulders. That's what I'm gonna say. So, and the reason for that is you have these interlocking cables that are actually carried across the entire fabric. So you have a fabric that's basically like this. So the stretch on that kind of fabric, you just don't have a lot of give to it, right? And so if you knit this up by just doing a gauge swatch in your stockinette, which is what the gauge swatch is called for in the pattern, then you're not quite getting a sense that of the actual sizing of the cable portion of the sweater. Now I will also say the pattern doesn't say anything about going up or down needle sizes. Oftentimes in colorwork patterns or in cable patterns, you'll have a note in there from the designer saying you should go up a needle size, especially for this particular kind of cabling. Sorry, Tink's going down the stairs. You can hear her padding off into the distance there. So the designer doesn't make any notes about this. In fact, she knits, according to the pattern, she knits the cables in the same size needle. I am just, it's unclear to me how that would actually work out. I think she was either knitting incredibly loosely or like suddenly really knitting loosely with the same size needles, or something was going on there, because it's just not, I don't find it to be possible. That's what for me at least as a knitter. So I blocked it, I stretched it, I washed it, wet blocked it, like really got it soaking wet, blocked it as hard as I could. And this is as much as I could get. So you can see on my mannequin, which does it's pretty close to me. My shoulders are a little bit wider. You know, you can get it to fit, kind of, but it is tight, and it begins to distort the cables just a little bit. Instead of popping out, they're flattened because they're being pulled so tight in this fabric. So what I wanted to do was not have this kind of fit for this sweater, and I was trying to think about ways to fix it, because if you just simply go up a needle size or 2, which I ended up doing, to loosen up the cables, it's still not going to be quite loose enough. So Spencer and I actually spent a lot of time talking about this. We took a little road trip. We walked on the beaches down south a little bit in the cold. We left the unheated house up here in the north, and while we were down there, I finished this yoke, and we just had this whole moment of like, well, how do we make this bigger? So I did go up 2 needle sizes for the cable portion, right? Just to loosen up my own knitting, right? I'm a tight knitter, so go up a couple needle sizes, and that will at least give the fabric a little bit of room to breathe. And in this particular case, because the cables are so interlocked, you're not gonna lose too much definition, or you're not going to create too spongy of an open air fabric, because you have so much of that going on. But Spencer also noticed, he looked at the pictures in the magazine, and he noticed that the way the yoke actually presents, if you kind of like look very closely, is that she actually has quite a bit of loosey-goosiness in her pearls, which are the fabric kind of sitting behind these cables. So I thought, okay, we need to replicate that. So it is okay in this case to have, if you're looking for the same look of the sweater, it's okay to have quite a bit of looseness in those pearl stitches. But the other thing I decided to do is to take some of the increases that would have happened down here and basically take that number of stitches and put it up earlier in the pattern. So I added 2 repeats of this cable pattern. So almost 2 inches, 2.5 inches worth of fabric. Eventually, once you get through all the increases, you start pretty small because it's a yoke, circular top down, and they grow like little triangles this way. So I added 2 pattern repeats to my yoke. I cast on with the same number of stitches with an even smaller needle, size 6 needle, and then I did increases right here, right underneath the ribbing, to 8 increases to give me enough stitches to start 2 more pattern repeats. Then I worked the cable pattern in a needle that was 2 sizes bigger than my normal needle. And then down here, I just did 1 more set of repeats instead of 2. And I did a little bit of monkey business with the number of sleeve stitches to make sure that the sleeves were going to be loose enough, and the underarm stitches. So all of that, all of that crazy monkeying resulted in this sweater yoke, which you can see is much more springy. It has a little bit of give to it. The cables still have some good definition, but I think you can also see, I haven't washed or blocked this yet, but I think you can also see that there's a lot more space in between these cables in these purl stitches. They're very loose in the purl stitches, and the cables themselves are still fairly tight because that's just the nature of these cables. They're not, some cables have like a verticality to them that allows a kind of stretch in between them, because usually you'd have, you know, purl stitches or some other resting kind of stitch between the cables, so there's a little bit of stretch. Because of the fact that these are intertwined like this, you just don't have that. But with the moving the needle size up, I did manage to get a little more stretch and spring. So I'll show you the same move on this. This one isn't going to give you the same. It just doesn't stretch as much. So that's where I got to with this yoke. I'm pretty happy with the sizing now. I didn't put it on waste yarn or extra needle so I could show you on the mannequin, but I did try this on. I put it on some waste yarn and pulled it on, and it has, I have a picture of me wearing it, I'll throw that up. So it has some definite give in it, and it fits around the shoulders and everything. I also ended up working the short rows down below. So oftentimes with a yoke like this, you'd put your short rows up here, and in the pattern that's where they are. And I did that with the original. The original version does have the short rows up high on the back of the neck, so you can see that there. You get a little bit of an extension. But I, in all my needle switching and everything, I forgot to add my short rows up there. So I just put them right down here, right underneath the cables in the yoke, but before I divided for the sleeves. They work just fine. You can see that they give you the same effect of lowering that front neck and raising the back neck, right? So in case you ever forget your short rows, don't freak out. You can add them after the fact, as long as you add them, as long as your pattern allows you to add them after whatever yoke color work or cables or whatever's going on there. You can add them at the bottom before you divide for your sleeves, and everything will be just fine. So you can see this one is still so tight. Oh, yeah, I wanted to save it just to be able to look at it and think about it, and I'm glad I did, because the difference between these two is like really night and day in terms of their flexibility and stretch. So yeah, so that's the newest sweater on the needles. I'm knitting it up in Shorn, as many of you know. This is the yarn I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, and it's the yarn that's that I produced this year from Kathy's Fleece. So it's Corriedale and a little bit of Corriedale Teeswater Cross. It's a 3-ply natural gray, and it does really well with cables, as you saw with all of the patterns from this particular batch of patterns. So we had the Ziggy Hat and the Hollyhock wrap and the Vincent's Cowl, and they all have little bits and pieces of cables in them, or twisted stitches or stitches that are moving. And this yarn, you can see, really does show up those cables very nicely. So they're nice and plump and round, and that's that 3-ply yarn. The cables want to pop off the surface. So it's one of the reasons that I wanted to use this yarn for this particular sweater, and I'm glad I reknit the yoke for a bunch of reasons, but one of them is just the cables appear pretty flattened here in this kind of version because they're so stretched because of the sizing. Whereas here, where they don't have to stretch, you can see that they're much kind of plumper and, you know, more visible on the surface of the sweater. So that's what I've been up to. I also ended up needing to change the body stitches because my gauge from all the Shorn knitting that I had done, it should have been 20 stitches for every 4 inches, but on this particular sweater, as I got down to this portion of the body, perhaps because I was working in the cables and with the upper size needles and things like that, this portion of the body I'm getting closer to 19 stitches over 4 inches, so I needed to go back and pull out a little bit of that body down below the sleeve separation, and I ended up getting rid of, I think it was about 18 stitches total, yeah, in between the division for the sleeves and the actual body. So I did a tiny bit of shaping here and then just a tiny bit of stitch elimination. I moved a few stitches over to the sleeves, things like that. And that way I ended up with, I'm going for I think a 36-inch bust with a 19 stitches for 4-inch gauge. So it's been a little bit tricky. It's been a little bit of pulling out and reknitting, but as my Zoom group said yesterday, it's such a lovely yarn to be knitting with that I don't mind the reknitting at all. It's really beautiful. And yeah, it's this particular Shorn, this is Shorn 4. I've loved all the Shorns, but this Shorn is my favorite. I really do love it. If you're interested in working with it, I do have some left in the shop, and I'd be happy to have you knit your own sweater in Shorn. It is a beautiful, it's really, I know I'm like biased, but it is one of my favorite Shorns. And I'm really happy to be knitting a sweater in it, especially this sweater that's full of like cable-y goodness. So that's my long, it's kind of becoming a long haul project because I had to reknit the yoke, but I'm enjoying it, and I'm keeping all my notes over on the Ravelry project page, so if anybody else is knitting the sweater and wants a kind of recap of what I just talked about in terms of sizing and in terms of needle switching and all the things I needed to do to create a yoke with this intertwined cable that would actually fit across shoulders and upper chest, those notes are going to all be over on my Ravelry project page, so I will continue to update them and keep them there for you just in case anybody else is knitting this sweater. So yeah, I think that's it for this episode. It was lovely to see all of you here in the yarn room this week, and I hope to be back in a couple weeks to talk to y'all again. Maybe I'll have this, well, not this one, but this one completed by then. All right, in the meantime, take care. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.